Tonight on Primetime, questions are growing over the future of Western security as Donald Trump signals a tougher stance toward allies and long-standing defense commitments. Trump calls NATO a paper tiger. Is he right? Well, very good evening. Welcome to Primetime. The transatlantic partnership then is facing renewed pressure. Donald Trump is once again challenging the role of NATO, raising fresh uncertainty about the unity that has underpinned Western security for decades.
US President Donald Trump says he is considering pulling the United States out of NATO after criticizing allies for what he calls a lack of support during the war with Iran. His comments follow disagreements over the Strait of Hormuz, where European countries declined to deploy naval forces alongside the US.
Many of them said, we'll be there after the war is completed. And so I learned about NATO. NATO won't be there if we ever have the big one. You know what I mean by the big one. We ever have the big one, hopefully we won't. Relationships very good with the big one, better than with NATO. But they won't be there. And we spend billions, you know.
US officials say NATO cannot be a one-way street, while European governments argue they were never given clear requests or timelines for any Hormuz mission. Beyond the immediate crisis, Trump's rhetoric is fueling fears that the United States may not honor NATO's core principle of collective defense, the promise to protect allies if they are attacked. Legally, leaving NATO would be difficult. A 2023 US law requires approval from 2/3 of the Senate to withdraw, but analysts warn that a president could still weaken the alliance by refusing to commit US forces, even without formally exiting.
He could begin to pack up, to take American troops and move them out of Germany and move them out of the United Kingdom and move them out of Poland. And this, in some sense, would be a sign to the Europeans that the days of the United States deploying forces in Europe to help protect you against external threats, Russia in particular, those days are coming to an end.
That uncertainty is already shifting thinking in Europe. Some officials now openly discuss preparing for a future where the US plays a reduced role in continental defense, something that would have seemed unlikely just months ago. Experts say the biggest beneficiaries of this division would be geopolitical rivals.
If there are parties out there that are smiling, that are enjoying this moment, it's the adversaries of the West. It's Russia, it's China, because they would be very happy were NATO to be dismantled. They would be very happy if the United States withdrew its protective umbrella from South Korea and Japan. They like it when the West is divided. And as a consequence, this is in some ways a gift to the adversaries of the United States and its allies, Russia and China. And that's yet another reason that my best guess is that this is a threat upon which Donald Trump is not going to act.
Despite the sharp rhetoric, some analysts believe a full withdrawal remains unlikely. Trump has shifted his position on NATO before, and diplomatic efforts are already underway to ease tensions.
Okay, let's bring in Steve Gill now, a political commentator who's been closely following US foreign policy and Washington's approach to its allies. Steve, really good to see you, as always, back on Primetime. When you hear the president speak like this about NATO, Steve, what do you think the real purpose is behind it? Is it about applying pressure so that NATO finally turn words into action, or is he really speaking more perhaps to voters back at home?
I think it's a couple of things. First, I think President Trump's relationship with NATO and the expenses being borne by U.S. taxpayers has put the relationship with NATO on thin ice for quite a while. and then the refusal of NATO and the EU to cooperate with the Iranian conflict is kind of like they're already on thin ice, and these leaders in the EU start jumping up and down and doing jumping jacks on that thin ice and then question why they fall through the ice. When you look at what President Trump has demanded in the past, it was that the NATO members pay their 2.5% of GDP that they had obligated themselves to, most of whom were not paying that amount. Dragged them kicking and screaming to about a 5% obligation, most of whom who are still not paying that, while the U.S. is paying more than half the tab. And I find it humorous that some of these EU leaders and NATO leaders are trying to excuse their lack of involvement in the Iranian conflict by saying, well, he didn't give us a timeline or a specific game plan. What's been the timeline and specific game plan for the hundreds of billions of dollars they've obligated U.S. taxpayers to in Ukraine? So again, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. And I think that frustration from President Trump has put us in a position where he's questioning both the funding and the benefits to the U.S. when our allies aren't really allies except on a one-way street.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly an argument, as you say, Steve, about putting on pressure to increase the contribution that others need to make. But do you think President Trump really wants to destroy NATO, really contemplates the idea of it being disbanded, at the very least in the way that we've become used to the organisation? Or is he just using hyperbole, typically strong Trumpian statements to try and force a result?
I do think you're going to see a retrenching of the amount of funding. For example, if the U.S. is paying 62% of the cost of NATO, then I think he's going to say, no, you guys have to step up. We're going to withdraw our payments to 30% and put those extra dollars into helping ourselves here at home. One of the reasons you have these European countries able to offer free health care and free benefits and free housing to illegal immigrants that are flowing into their countries is because they're not having to fund much of their own national defense and national security. We're paying for that. The same thing is true of Canada as well. So when you have somebody else picking up the tab, you can afford to spend money on other things that keep your constituents happy because you're not having to pay for your own security and your own defense. So I think it's more likely we see a reduction in U.S. financial contributions, not really a wholesale withdrawal. Although I think you will see a reduction in the amount of forces and troops that are in these European locations in Germany and France and others, as I think the U.S. is going to retrench there. I don't see a similar thing happening as your analyst had raised the issue of Taiwan and Japan. I think that President Trump sees China as a serious threat, and I don't think that the problems with NATO are going to cause any kind of retrenching or backing off in the Asia Pacific.
And Steve, there are those that would argue, that have argued, that NATO is essentially a defensive alliance and that they could take a view that it was the US and Israel that started this action. Therefore, that they could question the extent to which this defensive alliance should then need to come in and support. Do you think there's any validity at all in that line of argument?
I think it's a weak argument. First of all, we've been at war with Iran for basically 47 years. They've continued to threaten their neighbors and Europe and the U.S. in the most vile ways. They have made promises that they have broken every step of the way. Their limit of 2,000-kilometer distance for their ballistic missiles when they can actually fire them 4,000, which would reach those European capitals that we're intended to defend them against, and yet they're not willing to step up to their own defense in this case. And dare I say, the first time you had a nuclear missile hit Berlin or Paris or London, or even a dirty bomb with the amount of uranium that they were developing to weaponized capacity, it would have been too late to act. And again, I think that's why President Trump has moved with very clear agenda to stop and dismantle their nuclear weapons capability in Iran, to remove or eradicate their ballistic missile capability to reach far beyond their borders, to, as we've seen, strike their neighbors in the Middle East and beyond, and to remove their revenue capacity to fund terrorists like Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and others. So I think President Trump laid out a very clear objective. as part of that, regime change will probably be necessary, will probably result. I mean, when you've killed off 400 or 500 of the top leaders, you've effectively had regime change, even if some of the same cultist ideology is still in place. And I think it remains to be seen over the next few weeks whether there really is an opportunity for the Iranian people to take control of their country or not. But that's not been the primary objective that President Trump laid out, nor what it appears that we have achieved at this point.
Steve, I'd like to get your view on Secretary Hegseth. I mean, he's clearly got a very difficult job to do. At times, he's looked like he's under pressure. He's now sacked the most senior, or one of the most senior army officers. I mean, is he doing that, do you think, to sort of stamp his own authority on things, or is it really just carrying out orders from above?
You know, I think we've seen for a long time, and you know, my dad was a career U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, and I've spent a lot of time in military locations all over the world, including a couple of times as a journalist deploying into Iraq. So I've seen up close and personal what's been happening. And I think what concerns, you know, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth is that we saw over the last 16 years or so a rise of the woke generals in the military, people being appointed and promoted because of characteristics that weren't necessarily that they were true warriors, that they were fighters, that they were military personnel. They were being, you know, raised through the ranks for DEI reasons or others. And I think, you know, there's been concerns that some of those who have been promoted through the process because of politics rather than capability has helped weaken our military status. We had a chairman of the Joint Chiefs who was admitting that he was willing to call the Chinese and warn them. We were in action. That's the kind of President Trump and Secretary Hegseth want to make sure can never occur again in our top ranks of the military. And I don't know the specifics of why this particular general has been removed, but I suspect that there is more to the story than we've been told at this point.
And finally, Steve, how long do you think this is going to go on for? We've heard all sorts of predictions ranging from indefinitely through to just a few weeks more. And a follow-up question to that would be, if it does go on for slightly longer than anticipated, who benefits, do you think, from that?
Well, I think that the world economy suffers the longer that it goes on. I mean, even though President Trump keeps pointing out that, you know, we can produce the oil here in the U.S., that we don't need any outside oil. Oil's a commodity. So whether it's Texas oil or Saudi oil or Venezuelan oil, it's a commodity priced value, and I don't think you can kind of separate oil prices from where they come from. Now, granted, this has only been a 35-day conflict, and I think maybe we got spoiled in Venezuela, where the Venezuelan war lasted 2 hours. But generally, when you look at a 35-day conflict and the total military dominance that the U.S. has achieved in this short period of time, it's nothing short of remarkable. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't a few missiles here or there or rogue commanders that can still strike and do some damage, whether it's to a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz or whether it's firing a rocket into Istanbul or into Dubai. But ultimately, the military conflict has been won by the U.S. and Israel. The challenge is what happens next. And frankly, who do you even negotiate with in Iran at this point? You've killed off their top 400 or 500 leaders. They're fighting amongst themselves. If somebody starts to look like they want to negotiate peace, they get assassinated by those who want to continue the hard line. So if you could reach somebody reasonable to say, look, we'll stop attacking the Strait, we'll stop developing nuclear weapons, is there a person that can make that statement with the capacity to implement it without themselves being assassinated? So I think, winning the quote peace is going to be the biggest challenge in the next several weeks. But I think that we can continue to eradicate their ability to strike. And then the sooner we can get European nations, Saudi Arabia and others to escort those tankers through the Straits of Hormuz, we get the flow of oil again that will lower the gas prices, oil prices, and restore kind of the booming global economy that we all want, in addition to the peace in that region that everybody wants.
Steve, it's always great to have you on the show. We appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's bring in now Oknian Petronijevic, an independent researcher, and he's joining us from Melbourne, offering a more European perspective on this. Oknian, thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you there. Just having a few technical issues, just getting you patched through. Oknian, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, Sean. Thank you so much for having me.
No, great to have you with us. These remarks from Washington, I mean, we're all fairly used, aren't we, to sort of quite strong statements from Donald Trump. But how are they being received in Europe? Is this just seen as sort of typical Trumpian political pressure, or perhaps something more serious?
Well, Sean, this is not the first time that Trump is making this kind of statements. However, the tone is a bit more serious, taking into consideration that we are dealing with a crisis. European Union has been facing an energy crisis that was provoked with the Iranian war, and these consequences are very serious and imminent, spiking energy prices across Europe. Regardless of that, I believe European Union, especially nowadays, going through all of these Trumpian phases, is definitely seeing this as a form of political pressure, especially taking into consideration that Trump has not been taking any serious steps in the case of NATO. The United States is still committing to the work of committees inside NATO. There are still a lot of American troops inside Europe or in different American bases. And I think that Europe is essentially understanding this as another form of Trump's negotiating tactics, with him using very strong language to persuade him to actually contribute militarily to the war in Iran. However, I believe Europe remains strong and still refuses to contribute strongly, with Prime Minister Starmer calling it noise and focusing on Britain's national interest, and Macron also opposing any idea of using force in the Iranian issue. So essentially, I believe that this is nothing more than political pressure from Washington.
And only something I was discussing with Steve Gill just a few moments ago, this idea of NATO fundamentally being defensive in its purpose, and certain analysts questioning whether or not they really should be involved in something that was started by the United States and Israel. What do you think of that analysis? And is that something that senior figures in the EU are actually arguing?
Well, yes, I believe that initially NATO's purpose was essentially a defensive one. They relied a lot around collective defense, and it was based in the Article 5. However, over the years, NATO's role has evolved, and I actually would like to point out one example where NATO actually acted very aggressively in a way, and not solely in a defensive way. And this was the 1999 bombing of former Yugoslavia, bombing of Belgrade, Serbia, and Montenegro. And I believe that this initiative, led by the United States, was conducted without the approval of the United Nations Security Council. So if there is a political will inside the alliance, I believe that there will be a certain extensive role of NATO. However, in the current Iranian conflict, this consensus simply does not exist. United States is pushing for further contribution. Europe is just opposing that idea currently. So I don't believe that currently we will see any form of extensive use of NATO in the Middle East.
And you mentioned then NATO evolving quite rightly. I mean, very difficult job, isn't it, to be Mark Rutte right now? What does NATO evolve into next, given all this pressure from Donald Trump doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that especially since the Ukrainian conflict, NATO has been very much focused around the idea of the collective defense, which is of course based in the Article 5. And this is something that Europe is really, really pushing for. They have been staying committed to the idea that Article 5 is not negotiable, even though Trump was seen a couple of times, chipping away on this idea. So it's a very complex process, and it's definitely been evolving over the years. I mean, even geopolitically, NATO has been involved previously in the Middle East. through several missions, especially the one in Afghanistan was very interesting because I believe we all know how it ended. It was not very successful. And I believe this is also one of the reasons why European allies at this moment are still very reluctant on, investing further into the region when their contribution to these NATO missions in Afghanistan to stabilize the region were not very successful.
Do you think there is an acceptance amongst Europe's leaders that the US is going to play a reduced role in European security in the future, in whatever form that takes? Or do you think there's some hope that when the Trump administration leaves, that things could sort of, to some degree, go back to what they were before?
Yes, potentially. I believe that some European allies still believe in the strong link across the Atlantic between European Union, European allies, Europe in general, and United States. However, Europe has definitely been very careful following all of these, recent events with Trump changing and United States changing its posture to Ukraine, to Russia, lifting up sanctions, not really contributing militarily that much anymore. So I believe Europe definitely took some decisive steps into lifting those defense spendings and contributing to further military capabilities inside Europe. However, they are predominantly limited to the coordination among states, coordinating those individual efforts, and essentially raising up those budgets on a European level, which is far, far from any form of collective security or collective defense. So to say, NATO, in that sense, at least from the European perspective, does not have an alternative, I would say so.
It's a very interesting point you make there. I mean, would you say then that the steps we have seen in Germany, in the UK, for example, obviously not in the EU, but nevertheless a powerful European country, would you say that to some degree that's still window dressing, that these countries really haven't got to a stage yet where they can actually really truly control their own future security?
It's a very difficult, Sean, because I think we should approach this question from two perspectives. One is definitely the military perspective. Militarily, and if you watch and if we look at the individual states, they have been very successful in raising some of the most critical military issues inside domestic, borders. Especially if we look at Poland, for example, or Germany, or France, who has, nuclear capabilities. United Kingdom still staying a very important military power in the region. However, they are really bound to a limited individual performance, and I believe that on the European level there has been some efforts who, under the recent tensions, have been accelerated in a way, with Brussels currently discussing the loan of 150 billion euros for defense expenditure through the Rearm Europe program and plan. So essentially, I believe that on a military level, the main question is whether Europe will be able to, alongside all of these spendings and acceleration of these processes, will it be able to actually sustain a new type of warfare, which is predominantly based on long-range ballistic missiles, on air defense, on intelligence sharing, which United States still play a crucial role in Europe. And if this new type of war will actually be something that Europe will be able to face and go against, it's a question still. There's also another dimension that we should definitely mention, and that is the political one. On a political dimension, it's really difficult to see Europe as a united actor. Europe still remains very, very fragile, so to say. We have seen countless, so to say, examples of member states opposing some of the crucial policies, international policies, foreign policies that have been unanimously accepted by all of the other states. I'm particularly talking about Orban and Hungary, especially in the case of Ukraine. And I believe that Europe is just organization, an entity that is not able to adopt some of the mechanisms that will actually overcome these problems and become an actual united actor in international relations. But besides that, I believe that there's another growing threat to these issues, and that is the fact that a lot of far-right movements inside the European Union have been growing, and their stance towards, the defense expenditure is very complex. There has been multiple statements from Marine Le Pen, from AfD about, the idea of future of the countries in NATO alliance and different international cooperation, military cooperation agreements, and so on and so on. So essentially, I believe that in a long run, Europe will face a lot of problems for their political unity when it comes to military and, generally speaking, their contribution to the global politics in that sense.
Ognian, we are a global channel, but I think you are the first analyst we've had on from Melbourne. So we do appreciate your time and your analysis very much indeed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at growing ties between Russia and Armenia and what closer cooperation could mean for trade and connectivity across the South Caucasus. Do stay with us. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. High Candy. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording on the 28th of November. Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam. Tel Aviv.
Washington.
London.
Moscow,
Kyiv. Berlin.
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul. For A News.
A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, Russia and Armenia are looking to deepen their ties following talks in Moscow between Nikol Pashinyan and Vladimir Putin. Well, the discussions focused on trade, bilateral cooperation and strengthening economic and transport links across the South Caucasus. A News' Dasha Chernyshova sent us this report from Moscow.
These two countries have traditionally deep ties, and in his opening remarks, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he hoped that internal political tensions linked to the upcoming elections in Armenia would not harm bilateral relations. He stressed that the two countries are united by a shared history and what he described as civilizational community. The talks focused primarily on economic cooperation, with specific attention paid to Armenia's interaction with the European Union. President Putin warned that as Yerevan is is developing its ties with the EU, it is clear that membership in both the EU customs framework and the Eurasian Economic Union is simply impossible. He also noted that Armenia benefits from lower gas prices as it is supplied by Russia. Putin said Moscow always welcomes anything that benefits the Armenian people. For his part, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan thanked the Russian leader for Moscow's role in brokering peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan and said that the country is deeply valuing its ties with Russia. He added that those ties will continue to develop dynamically after Armenia's parliamentary elections. Pashinyan also said Armenia is expanding its energy cooperation with Russia, including the possible construction of another nuclear power plant. He noted that Yerevan has put its participation in the post-Soviet military alliance of the Collective Security Treaty Organization on hold. Both sides acknowledged that bilateral ties have gone through significant tests in recent years. Dasha Cherneshova for A News in Moscow.
OK, let's bring in A News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief now, Orkan Amashov, who's been closely following developments across the South Caucasus. Orkan, always a delight to have you with us in the studio. What's going on here then? Because on the surface it looks like a kind of a reset between Moscow and Yerevan. Is it really about just a sort of simple partnership, or is this Russia reminding Armenia where their dependencies still lie?
Absolutely. I think if you go back to Vladimir Putin's speech delivered there, it was very clear. Putin was saying that Armenia and Russia have got very strong economic relationship. Russia happens to be Armenia's key trading partner. Around, I think, 35 or 36% of Armenia's foreign trade is connected with Russia. Russia is an indispensable actor, and Armenia is fully cognizant of this reality. And also, very interestingly, I think it wasn't Vladimir Putin, but Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Averchuk, in his interview to TASS information agency, said that over the past 10 years, from 2015 to 2025, Armenia's trade interaction with Eurasian economic space has increased tenfold, and that particular economic space is dominated by Russia, whereas the similar figure for the bilateral interaction, trade interaction with the European Union shows very, very small figure. So basically saying, whatever you may think about your future, your destiny is inextricably connected with Russia. And also Vladimir Putin distinguished between Armenian government and Armenian people. He said that by nature, by default, Russia is not in a position of doing anything which would go against the interests of Armenian population. And he said that whoever comes to power on the 7th of June after the parliamentary elections, Russia's policy will be one of friendly, neighborly relations. So basically there was an element of threat there. It was a fascinating exchange between the two leaders, and we can discuss its key compartments. But back to your original and central inquiry, relations are incredibly strong. Russia and Armenia are treaty allies. Russia is still part of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and basically Armenia is part of Russia-dominated economic space. Those elements, those realities are still there, but there is more to that, and we can discuss it later.
Yeah, very difficult for Mr. Pashinyan in a sense, isn't it, to try and balance these two loyalties, these two actors on either side. You know, you've got the EU, obviously, and then Russia. Do you think it risks Yerevan being sort of caught between a rock and a hard place?
Yes, indeed. It's exactly the reality of Armenia. And I think, with all due fairness, Prime Minister Pashinyan has been dealing with this delicate task in an admirable fashion. He has been, what he said in relation to Armenia's aspirations to join the European Union, in reaction to what Vladimir Putin said. Vladimir Putin made it very clear, and it's a reiteration of the old formula. You can't be members of two different customs regimes. It's a reality. If Armenia wants to join European Union, they will need to leave Eurasian Economic Union. And Vladimir Putin, Prime Minister Pashinyan's response to that was very clear. There was no double entendre there. He said that, yes, indeed, that's a reality. Currently, it is within our interest to pursue close economic interaction with EU. This is a government policy supported by Armenian public. Simultaneously, it's within our interest to maintain our good relations with Eurasian Economic Union space. And when we reach the point when we will be forced, compelled to make a decision to choose between the two regimes, Armenian public will tell us what to do. So effectively what he's saying there, for the time being, we're part of this regime, Eurasian Economic Union. It's perfectly within our interests. Simultaneously, we are increasing our trade relations with, increasing the intensity of our interaction with the European Union, laying the foundation for future economic interaction. And let me tell you how that future economic interaction may happen. But when the time comes, we will make our decision. And let me make one point absolutely clear. Once there is Armenian-Azerbaijani peace deal, there will be Turkish-Armenian normalization. And the real pivot towards Europe could only happen after Turkish-Armenian normalization. And I think then Pashinyan will be able to say, well, the reality of the past is the reality of the past. Now we have achieved a new reality, and Turkey will provide them access to the European markets. Only then, not now.
Is Putin trying to stop this then? Or is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's more nuanced than, of course. Putin is a shrewd operator, and Russian politicians, including Deputy Prime Minister, the government, Vladimir Putin himself, have been publicly very understanding towards Armenia's situation and so-called pivot towards Europe. They're saying that we understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to diversify. But really, will you be able to diversify? You're a small, tiny country, about 3 million population. The economy is not really vast. 35% of your trade is connected with Russia. Figure in terms of trade turnover, as long as 2024 is concerned, was around $11 billion US dollars. Now it is only 7.4, or probably Putin mentioned 6.4 billion US dollars, because that dual track trade involving Armenia helping Russia in terms of circumventing sanctions applied to Russia has been sort of extracted from that 11 billion US dollar figure. But there, I think, Putin made a very shrewd reference to the bilateral trade between Russia and Azerbaijan. With Azerbaijan, the figure stands at 4.9 billion US dollars. It's a considerable figure, but it's smaller than the bilateral trade turnover between Russia and Armenia. So effectively saying that even with your biggest neighbor, which is Azerbaijan, our trade turnover is smaller than our trade turnover with you. So basically saying that Russia is inevitably there, it's indispensable, like it or not, we will be your key partner. And also, our approach to Armenia is beyond your government. And some of the points Vladimir Putin mentioned about the 7th of June elections, I think deserve closer inspection. We can discuss it later if you have time for that.
Yeah, beyond your... It's very interesting, the language there used by Putin. I mean, do you think that the leverage is limited to trade, or are there, in practical terms, are there other levers that Moscow can pull to control and influence?
There are some other levers. One of them, of course, internal process. Vladimir Putin made it very clear that he's very concerned about some of the developments taking place inside Armenia. He said that, he made a reference to, without naming him, Mr. Karapetyan, who is a Russian tycoon, Russian-Armenian tycoon, Russian passport holder, who's currently in jail. He said that we're very concerned that certain people are not in a position to participate in the election process. We would have liked to see a different picture, to which Prime Minister Pashinyan reacted, saying that, well, it's our legislation. You cannot be Armenian Prime Minister if you happen to hold the passport of another country, be it Russia or any other country. Vladimir Putin effectively mentioned about some of the restrictions in Armenia's internal political processes, to which Prime Minister Pashinyan reacted, saying that we have free internet. We know that there are certain limitations as to internet in Russia. It was a very interesting exchange. Pashinyan looked very brave, very open, very candid. But allow me to be very brief. Behind the facade of this bravery and bravado, there is some element of substance, and that substance is connected to Pashinyan's hopes that once he manages to win the election on the 7th of June, there will be continuation of the peace agenda with Azerbaijan that is supported by the United States, and ultimately the Turkish-Armenian border will be opened. Therefore, he's empowered and emboldened by the current peace process with Azerbaijan, and therefore that makes him strong vis-a-vis Putin. But of course, Russia is not using all of its resources. Russia is limited by virtue of being busy in Ukraine. Regarding Armenia, they've got certain resources, but they have to use their resources in an effective manner. Interesting moment. There will be EU-Armenia summit later, I think this month, and later in May, European Political Community Summit will take place in Yerevan. Basically, it's a crunch time for Armenian politics. Pashinyan looks strong, but because in Armenia, as I mentioned to you earlier, I think in one of our previous conversations, that takeover by Pashinyan was very political, and large sections, chunks of Armenian media landscape is still dominated by Russia-connected people. When you read Armenian media, you realize that anti-Pashinyan elements are in abundance, but their actual impact on the result of the election is not as big as it may appear to be on the basis of our analysis of the media landscape.
And okay, what about Baku in all of this? When you look at what President Putin has said, you look at the reaction from Prime Minister Pashinyan, what are the implications and potential risks for Azerbaijan?
Naturally, Azerbaijan genuinely wants, I suppose, we can't be very open about it. I mean, as a government, Azerbaijan cannot be open about it, but it's very clear to people like myself, analysts and journalists, that if Pashinyan fails to attain its objectives, the peace agenda between these two countries will be negatively impacted. It does not necessarily mean the element of confrontation coming back immediately on the 8th of June if Pashinyan fails to achieve its objectives, but it means the slackening, considerable slackening of the peace process, referendum not taking place, and without that referendum there will be no signing of the peace deal. It means massive problems for the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, and therefore Azerbaijan is very much concerned. I think Azerbaijani foreign policy is hinging on a number of important priorities. One is to appear to be very neutral, do not say anything which could be deemed as interference in Armenia's internal politics, take practical actions in line with peace agenda, helping Pashinyan, without actually saying that we are helping Pashinyan, we're helping the peace agenda. And if helping peace agenda helps Pashinyan, it's not something that we shouldn't be proud of or should limit ourselves in terms of articulating that particular point. And Prime Minister Pashinyan mentioned a couple of times during his exchange with Putin that there was consignment sent from Azerbaijan to Armenia. There's a question of fertilizers, Russian wheat and so forth. Basically, this connectivity agenda, which is currently being built between these two countries, should be beneficial to many actors, including Russia. And number 3 factor in Azerbaijan's foreign policy is that the peace deal with Armenia should lay the foundations for long-term stability in this region. The region should be coherent, strategically autonomous, and for Azerbaijan, it's vital, absolutely crucial to have Armenia as a neighbor which is free, independent, capable of taking necessary steps in order to protect its own national interests. Because interestingly enough, despite the fact that these two countries were at war for decades, now they benefit from their respective independences. I think that's a crucial moment.
And the potential, Orkan, we've spoken about the risks, we've spoken about the implications. The potential is still huge, isn't it? When you talk about trade and connectivity, the trip corridor, what it then might open up in terms of prosperity, both for Azerbaijan, Armenia, and many other neighbouring countries.
Absolutely. And also, what is very fascinating about this connectivity agenda, it's not really designed against anybody. It's not even designed against Iran. It's basically, the question is that Iran may be limited in certain aspects. Iran will lose its clout on Armenia because Armenia is currently too much reliant on Iran, or Russia's clout will be diminished in Armenia. But basically, diversification at its core provides opportunities for many actors, and therefore the room for prosperity is massive. And also, Trump route for international peace and prosperity is not just about Azerbaijan's two parts being connected, it's not just about Armenia's connectivity agenda, it's about wider east-west corridor. And in view of Azerbaijan's energy exports to European countries, it allows Azerbaijan to export its gas resources via Trump route for international peace and prosperity, because that route is not just about the motorway or railway, it's also about pipelines, energy lines. Yes. And it does not just connect Azerbaijan's two parts, but also it connects Armenia's southern part with the rest of Armenia via Nakhchivan. So opportunities are really immense there.
Always great to have you with us, Orkan. It's a delight to have you in the studio. Thank you very much. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Stay tuned.
America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Satellite communication became essential.
It was very tough to understand and why actually we should be doing this space.
We are not talking about astronauts, we are talking about data.
Satellite imagery turns what happens on the ground into data.
To transform complex space technologies, practical solutions. To ensure our independence.
In more than 50 countries, 200 companies.
Building complete satellite systems.
We are now developing and producing them.
This is not our dream. It belongs to other nations. What changed that path has now been opened. That this is no longer an unreachable dream.
Welcome back to Primetime Now. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, as you might imagine, we've got some Iran conflict related news, markets reacting, new partnerships forming. There's also a few stories on autos, AI and social media, so let's have a look. First up, Asian markets have traded mostly higher following reports of a new Strait of Hormuz transit protocol being drawn up. Cautious hope of the strait's reopening comes after yet another surge in oil prices on Thursday.
Asia-Pacific markets traded mostly higher on Friday, after Iran and Oman were reportedly drafting a protocol to monitor transit through the Strait of Hormuz, raising hopes that the crucial waterway could partially reopen. Tanker traffic through the key oil shipping route should be supervised and coordinated with the two countries, said Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister of Legal and International Affairs, according to Iranian state news agency. Oil prices surged Thursday before markets closed for the Good Friday holiday. US crude futures jumped almost 12% to trade at $112 per barrel, while global benchmark Brent was up around 8% at $109. The spot price for current physical cargoes of Brent crude oil soared Thursday to $141, the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis, according to S&P Global. South Korea's Kospi led gains in the region, rising 2.7% and closing at 5,377 points. Japan's Nikkei was up 1.2% and ended the day at 53,123 points, driven by consumer non-cyclical stocks.
Well, against the backdrop of the Iran war, South Korean and French presidents said following a summit in Seoul that the two countries, both major arms producers, are set to strengthen defense cooperation and address energy security issues together.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and French President Emmanuel Macron said on Friday they planned to boost defense cooperation and work together to address the economic and energy crises triggered by the war in Iran. The leaders also confirmed their commitment to bolstering energy security, including by collaborating to secure safe maritime transport routes through the Strait of Hormuz, Lee said after the summit. Macron said after Friday's summit that the countries, both major arms manufacturers, would strive to boost their defense ties. South Korea and France are due to sign a number of preliminary agreements to cooperate in sectors including critical minerals, semiconductors, quantum technologies, nuclear energy and wind power, Lee's office said. Macron is scheduled to meet the CEOs of Samsung, Nava and Hyundai Motor during the trip as he seeks to boost French exports to South Korea and attract Korean investment into France's industrial and technology sectors, according to the Élysée.
With global shipping disrupted, one of the world's largest automakers, Hyundai, warned that rebuilding supply chains would take time and that the effects would linger, even if the Middle East conflict were to end soon.
Hyundai Motor, the world's third biggest automaker by sales with its affiliate, Kia Corp, said on Friday that exports to Europe and North Africa, which typically transit through the Middle East, were being disrupted by the conflict in the region, underscoring growing strains on global supply chains. Kim Dong-jo, a senior vice president at Hyundai Motor's Global Policy Office, said rebuilding supply chains would take time and warned that even if the Iran war ended soon, the impact would linger. Hyundai Motor Group's logistics unit, Hyundai Glovis, also said it was currently unable to access some Middle East routes, forcing it to temporarily store cargo at alternative locations until conditions stabilize. South Korea's Trade Minister Yeo Han-koo said that some shipments were being diverted to intermediate hubs, such as Sri Lanka, where they are being held while companies reassess when transport can resume.
Still with the car industry, major producers showed off their brand new electric vehicle models for the US market at the New York Auto Show. New EVs were unveiled at a time when electric vehicle sales in the United States are at their lowest level in 4 years.
Major automakers unveiled new electric vehicles at the New York Auto Show, despite lagging consumer demand and a sharp downturn in sales after Washington eliminated a $7,500 EV tax credit. Kia said it would begin selling its lower-priced EV3 in the United States later this year, while Subaru offered a new 3-row EV named the Getaway that can seat 7. The Japanese automaker's family EV SUV will go on sale later this year or next year, its 4th EV model in the US market. Automakers are facing a tougher US EV market, but higher gasoline prices in recent weeks have spurred fresh interest. GM recently began selling its Chevrolet Bolt EV, which starts at $27,600 after it ended the prior generation in 2023. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation, a trade group representing GM, Ford, Toyota Motor, Volkswagen, Hyundai, Stellantis, and other major automakers, said EV sales were 9.6% of all US sales in 2025, but fell to 6.5% in the last 3 months, the lowest since early 2022, after the $7,500 EV tax credit expired on September 30th. EVs now account for 2.5% of total light-duty vehicles in operation in the US, while EV sales accounted for 10.2% of total vehicle sales in 2024. US President Donald Trump has taken a series of steps to disincentivize EV purchases and production and make it easier to produce gas-powered models.
For some artificial intelligence news, we go to New Zealand, where a startup is developing a hybrid chatbot and human referral tool to direct ChatGPT users who show violent extremist tendencies to de-radicalization support.
People who show violent extremist tendencies on ChatGPT will be directed to human and chatbot-based de-radicalization support. That's through a new tool in development in New Zealand. The initiative is the latest attempt to address safety concerns in the face of a growing number of lawsuits that accuse AI companies of failing to stop and even enabling violence. OpenAI was threatened with intervention by the Canadian government in February after it revealed it had banned a person who carried out a deadly school shooting without informing the authorities. Throughline is a startup hired in recent years by ChatGPT owner OpenAI, as well as rivals Anthropic and Google. It redirects users to crisis support when they are flagged as being at risk of self-harm, domestic violence, or an eating disorder. Its founder, Elliot Taylor, said it's also exploring ways to broaden its offer to include preventing violent extremism. OpenAI confirmed the relationship with Throughline, but declined to comment further.
And finally, the Irish government has begun testing a digital age verification tool as part of its digital wallet initiative. Dublin is among capitals looking to ban social media for children, following Australia's under-16 ban.
The Irish government launched a test phase of its digital wallet on Friday, including an age verification capability to keep teenagers safer online. The digital ID will be able to facilitate age verification to help protect children and young people from harms on social media platforms, according to a statement from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. Ireland, home to the European headquarters of the world's biggest tech companies, is one of several countries looking to ban social media for teens. The movement has gained traction following Australia's move to block under-16 accounts in January. Ireland sees age verification for social media as one step toward a wider ban on platforms operated by the likes of Meta Platforms Inc. Earlier this year, Finance Minister said teens on social media amounts to a major public health issue, citing the impact it has on mental health. The digital wallet will also be able to hold digital versions of birth certificates, driving licenses, and other official documents, the statement said. All European Union member states are required to have one by the end of 2026, but how they use it is up to each individual state.
Well, that's a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Handing it back to you guys.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Great stuff. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at disruption in the Strait of Hormuz and what it could mean for global energy flows, prices, and the wider economy. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Satellite communication became essential.
It was very tough to understand and why actually we should be doing this space.
We are not talking about astronauts, we are talking about data.
Satellite imagery turns what happens on the ground into data.
To transform complex space technologies, practical solutions. To ensure our independence.
In more than 50 countries, 200 companies.
Building complete satellite systems.
We are now developing and producing them.
This is not our dream. It belongs to other nations. What changed that path has now been opened. That this is no longer an unreachable dream.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam. Tel Aviv.
Washington.
London.
Moscow,
Kiev. Berlin.
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul. Port Emu.
Welcome back to Primetime. A new report from the United Nations is warning that traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has nearly ground to a halt, disrupting global energy shipments. Now, the slowdown is, of course, raising concerns over oil supplies, prices, and the wider impact on the global economy.
Transit through the Strait of Hormuz has slowed to near a standstill over the past month, according to the United Nations Trade Agency. The latest data shows maritime traffic has dropped by around 95% amid the ongoing conflict involving the United States, Israel and Iran, severely disrupting global energy shipments. The United Nations warns this could have far-reaching consequences, as the route handles a significant share of the world's oil and gas supplies. A prolonged halt is expected to push up energy prices and increase the cost of living worldwide. The agency has also downgraded its outlook for global trade growth, forecasting an expansion of between 1.5 and 2.5% in 2026, down from 4.7% the previous year. In response, global financial and energy institutions are stepping in. The International Energy Agency, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank say they are forming a joint coordination group to manage the economic and energy impacts of the crisis.
Okay, let's bring in John Bolus now, an expert in energy geopolitics. He's joining us from Istanbul in Turkey. John, very good indeed to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. We hope you can hear us there. Thank you. Great to see you, John. Thanks for joining us. It's fascinating, this, isn't it? If you really strip things back, you look at what Iran is doing, you look at the threats made by Donald Trump, energy is being used as a weapon, isn't it? It's quite deliberately now a geopolitical pressure tool, if you like.
I 100% agree. It's fascinating. We've seen energy used as a weapon like this before, but not on this scale that attacks the entire system. Obviously, the consequences of this are global, and it's just by Iran's ability to threaten flows through the Strait of Hormuz, they're able to basically disrupt the entire global hydrocarbon system. And it is going to be able to sustain that disruption based on, the asymmetric warfare tactics that they use. And so it's that uncertainty that they've created in the Strait that is going to raise costs and reshape flows of energy for certain, and a lot more, I believe. So,
and John, we're all used now to the superlatives, the hyperbole of sort of Trumpian language that we get, particularly intensified during this conflict. And America has always had this profile of being supreme or powerful. You can't bully them, you can't stand up to them, you have to sort of do what they say. But if you look at what's happened in the Strait of Hormuz, do you think there's evidence that actually that story is starting to show some cracks? We've seen French-linked ships get through, but we've seen Iran say that actually indefinitely the US and Israel ships will not get through. I mean, they're calling President Trump's bluff, and they're standing up to the US, aren't they?
Absolutely. It's quite impressive. the U.S. guaranteed the flow of the Gulf and really global trade for decades now. And this was a form of leverage, power that it gave them. And if they cannot do that, which I don't think they can, it certainly is a major blow and raises major questions about, how allies can depend on the United States, markets can depend on the United States. I mean, this was a public good that they were providing of sorts, as I said, that gave them leverage, but it was a free service of sorts. And that's no longer going to be the case. Clearly, just risk premiums alone are going to rise for the Gulf and probably, down the road in other ways as well.
And we've seen clearly tension between the US and the typical Western allies. We've seen a sort of a slight distance from Mr. Starmer, from Monsieur Macron. There was some support from Chancellor Merz, but you look across Europe. Do you think we're going to now start to see European leaders increasingly start to perhaps distance themselves from this hard line that the US is following?
I think politically they will, because politics is always domestic, but economically, geostrategically, I don't think there's a lot they can do at this point. They can't project force into the Gulf and change the dynamic there. To kind of completely shift alliances economically is not something you can do overnight, and I don't expect that to ever fully happen. But clearly, it's going to, fragment, get disrupted, and I do think politically it's going to get a lot more difficult for the Europeans to support the United States.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you make there, that it might be politically expedient, particularly domestically, but it could present an economic cost that those countries just cannot, frankly, absorb. What are they thinking now, these European leaders? Are they thinking, well, look, let's just sort of keep placating, keep sort of not being clear with our level of support until Mr. Trump is out of office? Or what is your sense of the strategy in Brussels and in member state capitals about how to deal with this situation?
I'm smiling because it's kind of the biggest question about Europe, is that it can't act geopolitically and unified. It's obviously made up of a bunch of member countries that have different agendas. So hard to generalize in that regard. I don't think there is much of a strategy, as I said before, in terms of how they can directly solve this crisis, but for kind of doubling down a bit in the short term on new infrastructure projects, new routes that can somehow bypass the strait. Of course, I mean, Europe, even since the Ukraine war, largely added to its renewable capacity. Great, that's a very strong European goal. However, it's still not enough. Energy demand is increasing throughout the globe, including Europe. It may have to kind of go back to reconsidering Russian hydrocarbons. Obviously, in the short term, they have. So Europe's really in a bind, and if ever there's a time for it to become unified and more geopolitically active and clear in its objectives, I think this is presenting it. It's an opportunity that they probably should have taken a while ago, but.
Now, of course, there are some hard realities. Of course, the US is by far the biggest economy in the world, by far the biggest military in terms of its power. But do you think, nevertheless, that there are certain shifts which have taken place? I'm thinking of the BRICS countries, for example, who have now started to really design and take forward their own alternative systems. Do you think there's a sense in which countries perhaps aren't quite as reliant on the West anymore?
Absolutely. This crisis, it will be slow, but it is a crisis, should push them to rely less on the West. I don't think, they don't need the West still necessarily to the extent that they did even 10, 20 years ago, the rise of China and their own economies and these kinds of things. The U.S., as I guess stated at the beginning, has provided this order, this global trade order protected by its Navy on the high seas. This has been ending for a long time, in fact, at least for 10 years or so now. The world is going to fragment. It's going to regionalize. The global order is unwinding, and this is a major push for it to unwind even further. So I do think BRICS countries, are going to have to forge their own relationships between themselves, with other countries such as China, Europe. These do present opportunities for new relationships to be formed.
John, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at a major political shift in Myanmar and what it could mean for the country's direction. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Satellite communication became essential.
It was very tough to understand and why actually we should be doing this space.
We are not talking about astronauts, we are talking about data.
Satellite imagery turns what happens on the ground into data.
To transform complex space technologies, practical solutions. To ensure our independence.
In more than 50 countries, 200 companies.
Building complete satellite systems.
We are now developing and producing them.
This is not our dream. It belongs to other nations. What changed that path has now been opened. That this is no longer an unreachable dream.
Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting from the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Emu.
Welcome back, you're watching PrimeTime. Now, a major political development is unfolding in Myanmar, raising new questions about the country's leadership and the direction it is now taking. Let's take a look at this report.
Myanmar's military chief, Min Aung Hlaing, has formally become the country's president after securing enough votes in a parliament dominated by military appointees and pro-army lawmakers. The transition follows a widely criticised election held over December and January, won by the army-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party, with critics saying it was designed to maintain military rule under a civilian framework. His rise marks a shift from direct military leadership to a nominally civilian role, while keeping power centred on the armed forces. Earlier this week, Min Aung Hlaing handed command of the military to Ye Win-u, a close ally and former intelligence chief, in a move seen as reinforcing his control during the transition. The 69-year-old general led the 2021 coup that ousted the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, triggering mass protests that evolved into a nationwide armed resistance movement. Despite the political shift, fighting continues across Myanmar, with several groups, including forces linked to Suu Kyi's party and ethnic minority armed organisations, announcing a new united front against military rule. Analysts warn the new administration could bring increased pressure on opposition forces, as regional engagement and worsening economic conditions test the unity of resistance groups.
Okay, let's bring in now Dr. Jarvi Vasisht. She's joining us from New Delhi, and she's been looking closely at analysing developments in Myanmar. Dr. Vasisht, very good indeed to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on Prime Time. Let's start with this shift then. Does it actually really change anything on the ground, or is this really just about consolidating control under a different structure?
Right. I mean, in Myanmar, we all knew that since the military takeover happened in 2021, the military would continue its power in one way or the other. If you see the history of Myanmar, this was not the first military coup in Myanmar. This was the fourth. And since independence, the military has had a very strong control in terms of economic power, political power, and that's why expecting that the military would take a step back, that was not something that we were expecting. And in the larger landscape, if we see things, every action or every step that the military took since the 2021 coup, they made sure that they continue to have this power. Even the constitution itself of Myanmar, the 2008 constitution, ensures and gives them the legitimacy to continue their power in the country. Right? If you look at the constitutional provisions themselves, the 25% reservation of the seats, that ensures that no constitution amendment takes place. So having said that, having understood the history of Myanmar, it was very pretty clear that Min Aung Hlaing would continue to be in power, would continue to ensure that the military has a superior position in the civilian government, and that's why the USDP party has won the majority of the seats. Now, when elections were also, being created by the Election Commission, they had maneuvered the laws in a way that ensured that, okay, smaller ethnic parties can take part, but they would not challenge the USDP directly. So that is the reason that the USDP party came with the majority force, and there were smaller places where ethnic armed organizations could challenge or, be in support of the USDP party. So in a way, these elections are curated. If we see it constitutionally, they are legitimate. If you see the provisions of the Election Commission, they fulfill all the provisions of the Election Commission. But if you then see the other side of story, the other ethnic armed organizations who were fighting the military rule, the NLD party, the NUG, of course, the elections were not inclusive. As it is, 39 plus NLD party were excluded from the provisions of, even contesting. So, of course, there is a question of being a free and fair elections. But on the other hand, if you see it constitutionally and legally, they did maneuver or manipulate the elections in a way that would ensure the
It's a very interesting point there. Let me just press you on that a little bit, because it is interesting, as you say, curated doesn't necessarily mean corrupt. Not inclusive doesn't necessarily mean unfair. But in your final analysis, because there has been a lot of criticism about these elections, were they free and were they fair?
See, if again, I would just reiterate the point that constitutionally, legally, they were free and fair. But if you see the other side of the democratic forces, they were not free, they were not fair. The 40 parties that were excluded from even contesting the elections, the laws which ensured that even you could give a death penalty. So there were almost, I think, 143 or 147 death penalties which were issued since the June law, that any kind of dissent, even if you're raising a voice against the USDP party or the Election Commission or the military, you would be under the bars. So obviously the kind of provisions that were made that did not ensure that they were inclusive, to say so, they were free to say so, or they were fair to say so, but they did maneuver the legislations and the constitution in a way that it supports their argument. So on the face of it, if you see the cosmetic surgery of it, yes, they did fulfill all the requirements required for the elections. But if you go deeper into the country, you have to understand that Myanmar is not one single nation. There are multiple ethnicities present in Myanmar, and fulfilling the demands of that has never been fulfilled. Even since the time of independence, they have never been able to have this consolidated one national identity of a nation, of a state, and that's why there were always fissures and always a military takeover which was trying to control the country.
Is that the only option then, do you think? It's a very interesting point you make about how difficult it is as a country to sort of bring it together. But is this sort of forced centralisation of power, is that really the only strategy available, do you think?
Honestly, that's what they have been doing. They have been, through the Burma majority, they have been trying to bring in that one central identity. But were they really successful? No. If you see the history of the country, there have been uprising, especially, and let me bring here the point, that the bordering regions, whether it is with China, whether it is with Thailand, whether it was with China, they all are contested. So the military holds the central region, the urban areas, but if you see the bordering regions, they are under the conflict, whether it is Sagaing, whether there is Kachin, whether there is Var State. So Var State in a way has a very good understanding with the military, and they run as an autonomous region. So they were not against the military coup also, but they continue to administer their own region. But if you see Arakanami, if you see Karins, all these areas have been under conflict and continue to be so. Even after the elections, there have been, there was this operation, I'm just forgetting its name right now, but there's this operation that the military has launched where they're trying to seize or gain back the territories that they lost. But honestly, on the ground, they are not able to recapture the territories which were not in their control. So currently, they're controlling the central region and the urban areas of Myanmar. But if you see the bordering areas, especially Arakanami, Chins, Sakains, Kachins, Karenese, Nothing. I mean, that's not under their control.
Yeah, there's an attempt internally to intensify control, isn't there? But at the same time, externally, to project legitimacy. Do you think that's working?
Honestly, there have been supporters for the Myanmar military. And to start with, let me frame it in a way that China has been a biggest supporter. It has been playing this strategy with the military as well as the ethnic armed organizations, where it is supporting the military via providing them arms, via providing them support through the BRI projects, via providing them all kind of support that they can do so. But on the other hand, are also providing support to the ethnic armed organizations. This is all well, researched, documented, that how they have provided them the means to fight the battle against the military. Having said that, even Russia, for that matter, Russia has supported arms and ammunition to the Myanmar military. They have supported the Myanmar regime. If you see ASEAN countries, it is a very strategic thing that ASEAN works on consensus, right? Now, when it works on consensus, it only eliminated the Myanmar military representatives from the summit level meetings. But if you see other meetings which are going on, for example, for tourism or for any other matter, maritime, they were all part of it. So, in a way, the 5-point consensus which ASEAN had proposed, ASEAN is not one single voice. There have been divisions within ASEAN itself. So, in a way, there were few countries that were supporting the Myanmar military. There were few countries who were not supporting. And similarly, for India, it comes to the security perspective. That has been one of the major reasons that we have been trying to maintain a dual track policy where we are supporting the Myanmar military so that there is no problem with regard to the security provisions that they do provide us. Also with regard to the Kalatan multimodal project and IMTA highway that is important for India because it's the only gateway to ASEAN countries. And similarly for our economic relations as well as humanitarian aids to the ethnic armed organizations which are bordering our area, we have been providing the humanitarian aid so that they can cope up with the scenario. So in a way, yes, they are getting the international legitimacy. US has also in the previous 1 year changed its strategy, and I have written about it previously, that how it's trying to now rebuild the relations. I know that we don't have much time to delve into it, but the cyber crimes, which have been one of the biggest problem that the region is facing, as well as many other countries are facing, especially the Western countries also, as well as the rare earth minerals. These are two things, if we have any time further, I would like to discuss that.
And with all of that combined, Doctor, where do you think things are headed in the medium term? Are we looking at more stability or potentially a country that becomes even more divided?
Interesting. Honestly, stability would be there in the central regions, in the urban areas where the military has the control. It would try to restore stability and provide for the economic provisions, ensure that investments come in those regions. It would do so. But I would say the country would, in the medium to long term, at least till 5 to 6 years, remain divided because these ethnic armed organizations do get support from the outside forces. So they are not fighting a battle alone. So they would continue to rule their regions. If you just see Arakanami, if you just see Kachins, Sagain area, Chin area, Karanis, they would continue to fight their battle. Not just singularly, but they do have external support. So yes, there would be a divided Myanmar, not to say so in terms of governance, but to say so in terms of the conflict. That would certainly continue. Even when the elections were announced, the fighting, I would say so, continued, and it is still continuing. So the crisis, the uniforms have changed. Min Aung Hlaing now becomes the president of the country and is getting recognition. Of course, will get so because if you see again legitimate elections in terms of law, in terms of constitution, a big yes, but then in terms of inclusivity, a no. So it will get legitimacy through the external forces. It would try to centralize its power in the country and would try to represent Myanmar across the borders as well. But if you see the bordering areas of Myanmar, that would continue to be divided. There, the conflict is supposed to continue for times to come.
Very interesting indeed. Dr. Vasisht, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we check in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Satellite communication became essential.
It was very tough to understand and why actually we should be doing this space.
We are not talking about astronauts. We are talking about data.
Satellite imagery turns what happens on the ground into data.
To transform complex space technologies, practical solutions. To ensure our independence.
In more than 50 countries, 200 companies.
Building complete satellite systems.
We are now developing and producing them.
This is not our dream. It belongs to other nations. What changed that path has now been opened. That this is no longer an unreachable dream.
Welcome back. Now let's check in with our correspondents around the world. The United Kingdom and more than 40 allies have agreed to step up diplomatic pressure on Iran following a high-level virtual summit focused on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a key artery for global energy supplies. A News's Zainab Farizada has more.
The UK and its allies have agreed to step up coordinated diplomatic pressure on Iran following a high-level virtual summit aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz. More than 40 countries took part in the talks on Thursday, marking the first step towards building a coalition to secure one of the world's most important shipping routes. Foreign Secretary Edith Cooper said the focus of the meeting was firmly on diplomacy, with partners exploring sanctions and international pressure if Iran refuses to open the strait. She said countries are prepared to use every possible diplomatic and economic tool, including action through the United Nations, to ensure freedom of navigation is restored. Cooper accused Iran of hijacking the route and holding the global economy hostage, warning that continued disruption would have serious global consequences. The Strait of Hormuz carries around a fifth of the world's oil and gas, making its closure a major concern for energy markets and global trade. So these talks also looked at practical coordination, including working with the International Maritime Organization to safely resume shipping and support vessels currently stranded in the region. Notably, the United States did not take part in the meeting, despite ongoing tensions in the region. Instead, the discussions brought together a wide group of international partners, including European and Gulf nations, signaling broad concern over the escalating situation. There are also differences in approach. While Washington has called for more direct actions, leaders involved in the talks emphasized that any solution must be coordinated and diplomatic. French President Emmanuel Macron said reopening the strait would require cooperation with Iran and ultimately a return to negotiations. A joint statement from participating countries called for the immediate and unconditional reopening of the route, stressing the importance of international law and safe passage. Zainab Farizada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Turkey is now looking at ways to move its oil and gas without relying on the Strait of Hormuz, as tensions linked to Iran begin to threaten the flow of energy and the security of global shipping routes.
Turkey has drafted 5 alternative routes for the transport of oil and gas that would bypass the Strait of Hormuz, according to local media reports citing the Turkish Trade Ministry. Trade Minister Omar Bolat said Ankara was taking active steps to establish alternative transit corridors that could serve both energy producers and consumers, especially during times of crisis. The Hormuz Strait is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, with roughly a fifth of global oil trade passing through the strategic waterway. Disruptions caused by the ongoing regional war have raised concern about energy security and rising shipping costs. Among the alternative routes being considered are overland deliveries through Iraq and Syria, as well as a possible transit corridor linking the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Another proposed route would move energy shipments from ports in Oman to the United Arab Emirates and onward to regional markets. Yet another route being considered around Africa's Cape of Good Hope is also reportedly being evaluated. But officials say this is less attractive because it would extend delivery times by up to 15 days and significantly increase shipping costs. Earlier reports had indicated that Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia were mulling the creation of a joint consortium to coordinate oil transport from the Gulf region. In a related development, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan attended a virtual meeting on Thursday devoted to the ongoing crisis in the Hormuz Strait. Representatives of more than 30 countries reportedly attended the meeting, which was organized by the United Kingdom. Since the regional war began more than a month ago, Iran has allowed 1 Turkish-owned vessel to transit the Hormuz Strait, while 14 others are still awaiting Tehran's permission to cross. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Switzerland is tightening entry rules for certain Georgian officials joining other European countries amid concerns over governance and foreign policy direction. A News' Nini Nikolashvili reports now from Tbilisi.
Switzerland has imposed new visa requirements on Georgian diplomatic, official and service passport holders, marking a significant change in travel rules between the two countries. The Federal Council of Switzerland approved the move, saying the EU suspension constitutes a further development of the Schengen Acquis, which Switzerland, a non-EU member but part of the Schengen area, is obliged to adopt. The decision follows a broader European trend of tightening measures towards Georgia's official representatives. From now on, these passport holders will need a visa to enter Switzerland, with the restriction set to remain in place for 12 months. Importantly, the new rules do not apply to ordinary Georgian citizens who can still travel visa-free for short stays. This move comes shortly after a key decision by the European Commission on March 6, when visa-free travel was suspended for Georgian diplomatic and service passport holders across the Schengen area. That step marked the first use of the EU's strengthened visa suspension mechanism. According to the Commission, the decision was taken in response to what it described as ongoing violations of commitments tied to visa liberalization. These include concerns over democratic standards, human rights, and Georgia's alignment with EU visa policy. Officials in Brussels have pointed to developments since late 2024, including actions against protesters, opposition figures, and independent media as factors that have strained relations. The EU has also introduced stricter border checks and visa screening procedures for affected Georgian officials. These include more detailed background checks, mandatory interviews, and the possibility of visa refusal if concerns arise. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Iran's top diplomat Abbas Araghchi is warning that attacks on civilian infrastructure, including a recently targeted bridge, will not force the country to back down amid the ongoing conflict. A News' reporter has more now from Tehran.
The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that the U.S.-Israeli air raids on Iran's civilian infrastructure, including a bridge under construction in the city of Karaj on Thursday, will not push Iranians to surrender ever. In a post on X social platform, he said, every bridge and building will be rebuilt stronger, but what will never be repaired is the damage to reputation and trust. As the Israeli-US war on Iran has escalated on its 35th day following the first acknowledged US targeting of a bridge on Thursday, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai also condemned the air raids on the Pasteur Institute of Iran. He said it is beyond a war crime and an assault on the principles of humanity and civilization. Also, Araqchi, in a separate post on X, blasted US President's threat of bombing Iran back to a Stone Age, saying that there is a significant difference between the present-day Middle East and the Stone Age. He sharply responded, no oil and gas back then, suggesting that Trump's rhetoric ignored region's strategic importance. Meantime, President Masoud Pezeshkian held phone contacts with the Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and the Finnish President Alexander Stubb. According to official sources, he praised the government and people of Azerbaijan for their sympathy during the war and criticized the European Union's position on repeated violations of international law by Israel and the United States. Duraj Shiralilu, downtown Tehran, Foreign News.
Afghanistan is dealing with a worsening humanitarian situation after days of heavy rain and flash flooding have left dozens dead and caused widespread damage to homes, roads and farmland. Tamim Bahis has the latest now from Kabul.
More than 50 people have been killed and dozens injured in flash floods caused by heavy rain across Afghanistan over the past week. According to the National Disaster Management Authority, more than 4,600 families have been affected. Over 2,600 houses have been damaged or destroyed. 337 kilometers of road have been washed away, and more than 8,500 acres of farmland have been inundated. Rescue and relief teams are now working in the worst hit areas as emergency aid is distributed and assessments of the damage continue. The crisis comes as Afghanistan's meteorological department warns that more heavy rainfall could hit 31 of the country's 34 provinces in the coming days, raising fear of further flooding in already vulnerable and remote communities. Against that backdrop, the head of the National Disaster Management Authority, Nuruddin Turabi, held talks with Turkey's acting ambassador to discuss stronger cooperation in disaster response, humanitarian support and technical capacity building. Both sides stressed closer coordination in search and rescue operations and disaster management, as Afghanistan seeks more support to respond to both the current flooding emergency and the wider needs of displaced and vulnerable families. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Ukraine is stepping up its outreach to Central Asia, looking to deepen ties through regional platforms and expand trade and energy links. A News correspondent reports now from Almaty.
Kyiv says it wants to deepen its engagement with Central Asia through multilateral formats such as C5+1. That's according to Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Mishchenko speaking after talks in Tashkent. The focus is on building coordinated ties across the region and joining existing platforms for dialogue with international partners. That shift is already being backed by concrete steps. Ahead of his visit to Uzbekistan, Mishchenko traveled to Kazakhstan, where discussions focused not only on diplomacy, but also on expanding economic ties. Trade between the two countries reached more than $415 million in 2025, showing steady growth compared to the previous year. The structure of that trade reflects a complementary relationship. Kazakhstan exports ferroalloys, fertilizers and rice, while Ukraine supplies food products including chocolate and confectionery, as well as pharmaceuticals and dairy goods. Energy is also moving into focus. Earlier, Ukraine's ambassador to Kazakhstan, Viktor Maiko, said Kyiv is inviting Kazakh investors to take part in rebuilding oil refineries with the aim of supplying refined products to the European market. In return, Ukraine is offering technologies for deep drilling and enhanced oil recovery, which could help increase production in western Kazakhstan. The initiative comes against the backdrop of established C5+1 cooperation formats between Central Asian states and major international partners, including the United States, the European Union, Japan and South Korea. And Ukraine is seeking to position itself within this existing regional framework. Fariza Klimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Tashkent is hosting the Central Eurasian Venture Forum, bringing together investors, startups and tech leaders to discuss the future of venture capital and innovation in the region. Sevil Rajapova has more.
Tashkent has become a key meeting point for the regional innovation ecosystem, as the Central Eurasian Venture Forum brings together venture funds, startups and investors from across Central Eurasia and beyond.
Initially, we started as an agency, but by the first half of 2025, we decided to transition into a startup. We secured our first investment commitment from Most IT Hub, and since then, this whole journey has been developing further. At the moment, the team consists of around 20 people, and in many ways, we are just getting started. I hope this is only the beginning. We are now on the path to growing from a startup into a sustainable, profitable company and to securing a new round of investment. At
the moment, our startup is actively developing. We are currently at the pre-seed stage, where we have received investments from major funds such as Most, IT Park Uzbekistan, Astana Hub, well-known businessman Oscar Hartman, as well as 2 private investors. I believe our startup is now in a very active phase, and for us, everything is just beginning. We would also like to thank the organizers of this event for this honor. All of this is thanks to our team, and our biggest achievements are still ahead of us. In Central Asia, particularly in Uzbekistan, I believe all the conditions are in place for startups to grow very quickly.
Last year, we were leading Silkway Acceleration Program for Astana Hub. So it's the program launched with the support of Google for Startups. And last year, we launched Digital Startup Award Acceleration Program in Uzbekistan with the support of IT Park Uzbekistan. So we are a regional ecosystem player working directly with the startups.
The fall focuses on emerging trends and venture capital, with particular attention to artificial intelligence, fintech and deep tech sectors, as well as new models of so-called smart capital investment.
At present, venture funds are developing very active now in Uzbekistan, with strong support from the leadership, including the head of state, our president. There is now a significant focus on venture funding and various technology startups. Our startup ecosystem is developing very well, and we provide strong support to these companies across all areas.
Over the past 4 editions, the forum has already demonstrated tangible results, bringing together participants from more than 50 countries, attracting over 4,800 attendees, including 300 investors and business angels, and showcasing more than 400 startups from the region. According to organizers, the platform has led to the signing of more than 10 memorandums and agreements, with preliminary investment deals reaching approximately $34 million. This year's discussions are expected to further strengthen cross-border partnerships and position Uzbekistan as a region hub for innovation and venture investment in Central Eurasia. It is Sevil Rajapova from Tashkent, Uzbekistan News.
China and the European Union are increasing diplomatic engagement as tensions in the Middle East and pressure on key energy routes focus global attention.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi held phone talks with EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, with both sides exchanging views on China-EU relations as well as the escalating situation in Iran and its implications for global energy security. Wang stressed the importance of maintaining stable and constructive ties, while Kallas reaffirmed EU's commitment to continued dialogue and balanced engagement with Beijing. In a post on X following the call, Kallas said that Iranian attacks on civilian vessels and the threat of further escalation have effectively paralyzed traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global energy route. She emphasized that restoring safe, toll-free navigation in accordance with the international law is an urgent priority, adding that the EU supports diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions and calling for restraint. On March 31st, China welcomed a visit by a delegation of European Union lawmakers, the first in 8 years, as an opportunity to further stabilize ties strained by trade policies and political mistrust. The exchange comes as China ramps up diplomatic outreach on multiple fronts, with Wang recently holding talks with counterparts across the Middle East and Asia on regional tensions, including the Middle East conflict. Manan Mukhtim, A News, Beijing.
Now, before we wrap up, let's take you to space. NASA says the Artemis 2 crew are doing well and the spacecraft is performing as planned on its journey towards the moon. The astronauts have described a truly spectacular moment as they moved beyond Earth's orbit. Let's take a look.
NASA's Artemis 2 mission is now on course toward the moon, after a successful maneuver pushed the Orion spacecraft out of Earth's orbit and onto its deep space trajectory. A key engine firing has put the crew on a path that will take them around the far side of the moon and back to Earth. From this point, the spacecraft is largely guided by orbital mechanics, with only minor adjustments expected along the way. Mission teams say the crew remains in good condition as systems continue to perform as expected.
As far as the crew members, they're doing great. There's no indication that they're having any problems at all. So I don't expect that they're having any problems.
The crew has also shared their first moments from space, describing both the view and the experience.
But you can see the entire globe from pole to pole. You can see Africa, Europe, and if you looked really close, you could see the northern lights. It was the most spectacular moment, and it paused all four of us in our tracks.
There have been minor technical issues, including a temporary malfunction in the spacecraft's toilet system, where a fan used in waste management was reported jammed. Astronauts worked through troubleshooting steps with support from ground control, while backup systems ensured continued operation.
And I'm the space plumber. I'm proud to call myself the space plumber. I like to say that it is probably the most important piece of equipment on board. So we were all breathing a sigh of relief when it turned out to be just fine.
NASA says the issue is not affecting the overall mission. Artemis 2 is the first crewed mission around the moon in more than 5 decades, and is expected to push astronauts further into space than any human mission since Apollo.
And there'll be lots more space-related content across all A News platforms during the weekend. Well, that is all for Primetime for tonight, and indeed for this week. Do join us again on Monday for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, have a great weekend.